The airport lay in an unsettling silence, the kind that presses down on the chest and makes every sound, the distant hum of a generator, the flapping of a flag in the wind, the faint chatter over the radios, seem amplified. The early morning sun had just begun to creep over the horizon, painting the concrete runways in streaks of gold and orange, but it did nothing to warm the cold dread settling over the 300 Marines stationed there. Their equipment glinted under the sun, rifles slung and helmets tilted slightly forward, eyes scanning the perimeter again and again. Every shadow, every ripple in the desert heat seemed a potential threat. They had trained for this moment, yet no amount of preparation could fully brace them for what was coming. For weeks, intelligence reports had hinted at an enemy buildup in the region, armored columns moving through rough terrain, infantry units drilling for coordinated attacks, but the sheer numbers were hard to comprehend. 50 to 1. That was the ratio they had learned hours ago, and no one could escape the bone-deep chill it caused. In sheer numbers, they were insignificant. Every strategic point, every barricade, every defensive measure seemed fragile against the oncoming force. The officers tried to maintain calm, issuing orders, conducting roll calls, and checking weapon systems, but their unease was palpable. Even the seasoned Marines, who had faced firefights in foreign lands, shifted nervously, scanning the horizon with eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. The tension was mirrored above the airport, where the lone Apache helicopter stood poised on the tarmac, a steel predator awaiting its command. Inside the cockpit, the pilot, known to colleagues for her razor-sharp reflexes and unshakable nerve, went through her pre-flight checks with deliberate precision. Each switch flipped, each gauge monitored, each weapon system scanned for readiness. The hum of the auxiliary systems thrummed beneath her, a steady heartbeat in the otherwise still morning. She had faced combat before, certainly, but nothing like this. Facing 50 times the number of the men below was more than a challenge. It was a nightmare scenario. Yet she was not one to shy away from impossibility. Her mind was a steel trap, focused entirely on the task ahead: protect the Marines, survive, and return. Communication channels crackled with sporadic reports. The voices of the men on the ground were tense, clipped with urgency. Alpha Squad at Checkpoint 3 reports, movement 20 clicks out, one voice said. Another added, visual on multiple targets. Too many for our numbers. She listened, absorbing every word, piecing together the mosaic of the enemy's advance. She knew the airport itself was the lifeline here. Losing it would mean annihilation. Every second counted, every decision could cascade into chaos or salvation. The Apache's rotors began to stir, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to echo through the empty hangars and tents scattered across the airfield. Marines paused mid-task to glance skyward, some unconsciously gripping their rifles tighter, others whispering prayers under their breath. There was something almost mythical about the presence of the aircraft. A single machine, a single pilot, standing between them, and overwhelming odds. Rumors had preceded her stories of past missions, where she had pulled impossible feats under fire. But now, these stories were irrelevant. What mattered was here, now, and the enemy's shadow stretched across the desert like a living threat. On the ground, young Marines shuffled nervously. Many were fresh recruits, their training months old, their first real engagement looming. Their faces, still unweathered, reflected fear masked by determination. The veterans among them offered quiet encouragement, clapping shoulders or giving terse nods. "Stay calm, watch your sectors, and trust her," one whispered to a trembling private. But even as words of reassurance passed from one to another, no one could fully hide the gnawing anxiety. They had been drilled for discipline under fire, but this scenario defied logic. They were sitting ducks. The pilot's hands moved over the controls with practiced ease, yet her mind raced. She ran through simulations she had drilled countless times, imagining enemy positions, calculating trajectories, and preparing countermeasures. The desert winds carried dust across the tarmac, gusting against the Apache's hull as if testing her resolve. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, centering herself, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Hundreds of lives would depend on the decisions she made in the next few hours. She could not falter, not once. As dawn broke fully, the first faint sounds of movement reached the perimeter. The desert, which had seemed almost static in its stillness, now came alive with the distant rumble of armored engines and the clatter of infantry boots. Her eyes snapped open, scanning the horizon through the Apache's sensors. Blips appeared on her radar, small at first, but multiplying rapidly. 50 to 1. The numbers hit her mind with a visceral punch, but there was no room for panic. Only calculation, only precision. Inside the cockpit, she whispered under her breath, a mantra of focus she had developed over years of training. She reviewed her weapon systems once more, confirming missile counts and ammunition status. The roar of engines outside the cockpit window grew louder as more enemy units came into view. She adjusted her helmet, secured her harness, and took a deep, steadying breath. This was the moment she had trained for. Not theoretically, not in simulations, but in the unforgiving reality of combat. Back on the ground, the Marines checked their equipment for the final time. Muzzle flashes from distant practice rounds reflected in the mirrors of vehicles. Radios buzzed with intermittent reports. Officers signaled positions, directing squads to cover the entrances and critical choke points of the airfield. The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Some Marines prayed silently, others gritted their teeth, but all shared a common, unspoken thought. Survival was a long shot. The pilot, now fully aware of her mission's gravity, initiated engine start procedures. The Apache shuddered, groaned, and then vibrated steadily as the rotors gained lift. A collective breath seemed to rise from the ground, as if the airfield itself was bracing for the inevitable. She felt every ounce of the helicopter's power beneath her, a merging of human skill and mechanical might. The desert stretched endlessly before her, and at its edge, chaos waited. As she lifted off, the world shifted. The men below seemed smaller, vulnerable, fragile, but not for long. She would become their shield, their weapon, and their hope. In the sky, she was alone, but she carried hundreds of lives with her. Every glance down reminded her of the stakes. Every sweep of the sensors confirmed that the enemy would not pause, would not hesitate. And then, with the wind whipping past her, the sun rising fully behind her, and the rumble of engines echoing across the runway, the calm ended. The storm was approaching. The early morning stillness of the airport, shattered as distant thuds and metallic clatters began to echo across the desert. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible over the hum of generators and the distant winds sweeping across the tarmac. But soon, the sounds grew louder, heavier, unmistakable, a relentless rhythm of engines, boots, and armored tracks advancing toward the airport. On the ground, Marines stiffened, instinctively gripping their rifles tighter, scanning every contour of the terrain. The radar screens aboard the command vehicles and the Apache above confirmed what every soldier feared. The enemy was not approaching in small numbers. It was a flood. A wall, 50 to 1. The sheer scale of the advancing force was almost surreal. Armored vehicles, tanks, and troop carriers rolled forward in coordinated formations, their metallic exteriors glinting in the morning sun. Infantry units spread across the horizon, moving with disciplined precision. Each passing moment brought the enemy closer, shrinking the distance to the airport from a distant threat to an immediate danger. The Marines had faced ambushes before, but nothing like this. This was a calculated assault designed to overwhelm, to crush every defender before help could arrive. Panic rippled subtly through the ranks. The veterans among them gritted their teeth and shouted orders to hold the perimeter, but inside, each one's stomach clenched. From high above, the Apache pilot scanned the horizon with trained eyes. Her cockpit instruments painted a grim picture. Every vehicle, every cluster of troops, every formation movement was tracked in real time. Her mind worked like a machine, cataloging targets, estimating threat levels, calculating angles of attack. She could feel the tension of the men below through the radio chatter, the desperation in their voices transmitting urgency and fear. They were counting on her. She could not fail. Not now, not ever. The first report came through from the forward observation team. Multiple enemy columns sighted, bearing 090, estimated 50 units, heavily armed. No air support detected in their vicinity. Over. The words were precise, professional, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. 50 enemy units, almost a complete annihilation, waiting to happen. She tapped a series of controls, scanning the incoming vectors, and began plotting potential strike paths. Every second she delayed could cost lives. Meanwhile, the Marines prepared as best they could. Sandbags were reinforced, machine gun positions checked, ammunition counted. Young recruits who had only months before graduated from boot camp looked to their commanding officers for guidance, their hands shaking slightly as adrenaline surged. The seasoned veterans moved among them, offering calm but firm reassurance, barking orders over the din of radios. Hold your positions. Watch your sectors. Cover each other. Even as they tried to maintain discipline, the knowledge of the enemy's overwhelming numbers pressed down like a weight on their shoulders. The desert itself seemed to react to the tension. Dust swirled in gusts along the horizon, carrying the faint metallic scent of machinery and oil. Heat waves rose in visible shimmers above the tarmac, distorting the advancing silhouettes, making them appear almost spectral. The enemy's advance was relentless, their formations disciplined and terrifyingly precise. There would be no surprise attacks, no hesitation, only sheer force, pushing forward like a tidal wave. The pilot adjusted her flight path, taking advantage of the rising sun to mask her approach from enemy observation. She knew her first strike had to be decisive. A small mistake could alert the enemy to her presence too early, and at 50-1, there would be no room for error. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from a laser-sharp focus. Every target she marked, every calculation she made, had one purpose: protect the lives below. She tapped her communications panel, connecting briefly with the base commander, confirming visual on enemy columns. 50 units, armored and infantry. Recommend immediate engagement, she reported. The crackle of static followed, then a calm, measured voice. Copy. Be advised, risk assessment is high. You are cleared to engage at discretion. Repeat, high risk. Over. She acknowledged the order, but knew, deep down, that no caution would save the Marines if she hesitated. The situation demanded boldness, precision, and unflinching courage. She tightened her grip on the controls and scanned the horizon once more. On the ground, Marines reported sporadic visual contacts with the enemy. Dust clouds rising from distant vehicle tracks hinted at the scale of the approaching threat. The roar of engines began to penetrate the otherwise quiet desert, a sound that grew with each passing moment. Soldiers whispered under their breath, some in fear, others in prayer. The young recruits clutched their rifles, knuckles white, hearts racing, trying to memorize every defensive position, every fallback point. The veterans moved deliberately, shouting precise commands, trying to instill a sense of order in chaos. The enemy wasn't just approaching. They were advancing strategically. Command vehicles positioned themselves to oversee the battlefield, Artillery units coordinated with infantry movements, and snipers took positions to pick off anyone exposed. Every step of their advance was calculated to break the defenders quickly. 50-1. The odds were unthinkable. Yet, despite the overwhelming threat, a thread of hope remained. It was thin, fragile, and dependent on a single aircraft above, controlled by a single pilot whose courage could turn the tide. As the enemy drew closer, the tension in the airfield became almost tangible. Radios crackled with urgent updates. Infantry approaching north perimeter. Heavy armored vehicles closing fast. We need air support now. Over. Soldiers exchanged anxious glances, some gripping their helmets as if to hold on to sanity itself. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last, every second stretching unbearably long. High above, the Apache pilot adjusted altitude and speed, seeking advantageous angles, while keeping the largest clusters of enemy forces in sight. The first salvo of missiles had to hit critical targets, softening the advance before they could reach the Marines' defensive lines. Her mind raced, overlaying tactical simulations from past missions onto the unfolding battlefield. The desert below transformed into a chessboard of life and death, with every move carrying consequences for hundreds of lives. The first visual confirmation of enemy armored vehicles came in bursts of metallic glint as sunlight struck their surfaces. Infantry formations moved in perfect synchronization behind them, carrying machine guns, RPGs, and assault rifles. She tracked the slow, methodical rhythm of the columns, predicting their movements, preparing strike points. The magnitude of the situation did not escape her. 50-1. Each vehicle, each squad, represented imminent danger. Yet, fear had no place in her cockpit. Only focus, calculation, and execution mattered. On the ground, the Marines braced. They had received the pilot's earlier reports, but seeing the enemy so close, so organized, was something entirely different. Their training kicked in, but the psychological weight of the numbers bore down heavily. Officers barked orders, directing fire teams to cover open stretches, marking fallback positions, and preparing for the worst. Their defensive strategy, no matter how well rehearsed, seemed fragile against such overwhelming odds. And yet, somewhere high above, a single Apache waited, a glimmer of hope in an ocean of despair. As the first dust clouds from enemy movement began to rise like pillars across the horizon, the pilot made a final series of calculations. She had the trajectory, the timing, and the sequence of attacks etched into her mind. The lives of 300 Marines depended on the next few minutes. The distant rumble of engines, the shifting desert heat, and the occasional glint of metal reminded her that hesitation would be fatal. She swallowed hard, braced herself, and prepared to transform the tense calm of the morning into the fury of combat. The enemy approached relentlessly, unaware that a single warrior in the sky had already marked the battlefield. 50-1. The numbers were terrifying, but the pilot's determination burned brighter than any fear. She adjusted her targeting systems, confirmed weapon readiness, and positioned the Apache to strike. Below, the Marines felt the first tremor of hope, a sense that perhaps salvation could arrive from above. The stage was set. The calm had ended. The storm was coming, and the first clash was about to erupt. A command center buzzed with uncertainty. Officers huddled over maps and communications equipment, weighing every decision. The situation was clear. 300 Marines faced an enemy force 50 times their size. Protocol dictated caution, yet every moment spent deliberating increased the risk of annihilation. In a corner of the operations room, the pilot sat quietly, helmet in hand, eyes fixed on the holographic map projected before her. She had rehearsed countless combat scenarios in simulators, but this was unlike any simulation. Numbers didn't lie. They were outmatched. Yet hesitation was a luxury no one could afford, not when lives were hanging in the balance. "Commander," she said, voice steady, "I'm ready. I can engage now. If we wait, they'll be inside the perimeter before reinforcements arrive." The reply was measured but hesitant. "Negative, Captain. You know the risk assessment. Engaging alone against a 50-to-1 force could destroy the aircraft and leave us with nothing. Stand by for further orders." Her jaw tightened. She understood the caution. She respected the chain of command. But she also understood the cries of the Marines on the ground, the desperate voices echoing through the radio channels. Fear was palpable. Survival was slim. Waiting was equivalent to surrender. She stood, helmet under her arm, pacing in the small operations room. Her mind ran through every possible outcome. She could attempt engagement alone, calculating angles, strike points, evasive maneuvers, perhaps even turn the tide. She could follow orders and stay grounded, waiting for reinforcements that might not arrive in time. There was no middle ground. The lives of hundreds of men were in her hands, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down like a physical force. Minutes stretched like hours. Reports from the field continued. The enemy's armored columns were drawing closer. Infantry squads fanned out in disciplined formations, while anti-aircraft positions began to materialize on the horizon. The pilots at the base monitoring her communications could sense her determination. One of the ground controllers leaned in, whispering urgently, "Captain, they won't wait. If you don't move, he'll overrun the airfield. It's on you." She exhaled slowly, letting the calm focus settle in her mind. Combat was always a mental game, and fear had to be converted into precision. She climbed into the Apache, her movements deliberate and methodical. Strapping into the cockpit, she ran through her checklist, switching systems online and double-checking weapon status. Rockets, Hellfire missiles, and a fully loaded 30mm cannon all ready. She traced each control, feeling the machine respond under her touch, a fusion of human skill and mechanical might. She engaged the engines. The rotors vibrated with power, resonating through the fuselage. Dust rose around the airfield, stirred by the sudden force of life and motion. Marines looked up, wide-eyed, as the Apache began to lift off, defying the odds, defying hesitation. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared, disbelief etched on their faces. They were witnessing not just a machine in flight, but courage incarnate, a solitary figure willing to face the impossible for them. The pilot's visor reflected the rising sun, glinting like fire as the desert landscape spread beneath her. She adjusted the throttle, letting the Apache hover briefly above the tarmac. From this vantage point, she could see the enemy advancing across the desert like an unstoppable tide. Engines roared, armored vehicles glinted in sunlight, and infantry moved with mechanical precision. The sheer scale of the oncoming attack was overwhelming. The numbers alone would terrify anyone, but fear had no place here. She drew a steadying breath and focused entirely on the task ahead. Strike, protect, survive. Before her was a battlefield in miniature. 300 Marines, scattered across a defensive perimeter, ready but vulnerable. She knew she could not shield every soldier simultaneously. Her strikes had to be strategic, precise, and lethal. One mistake could turn salvation into disaster. She reviewed mental maps of the terrain, pinpointing choke points and high-value targets among the enemy columns. She plotted the approach vector that would maximize destruction while minimizing exposure. Every calculation had to be flawless. Then came the radio update from the front line. Enemy vehicles closing on perimeter. Anti-aircraft fire observed in Sector 3. Infantry flanking from the north. Over. The tone was urgent, tense, but steady. She acknowledged the message with a nod, even though they couldn't see her. The enemy was advancing rapidly, methodically. Her window for action was closing. Every second counted. With a firm grip on the cyclic, she tilted the Apache forward and began the approach. The helicopter's rotors whined, cutting through the desert air as she gained speed and altitude, keeping the enemy formations in sight. The Apache's weapon systems hummed softly, the prelude to destruction waiting within reach. She marked targets, confirming coordinates, and mentally rehearsed the first strike sequence. Missiles would need to hit the armored vehicles. Cannons would target infantry clusters, and every movement had to be synchronized with precision. One error, one delay, and the Marines below would pay the price. The wind whipped past the cockpit, carrying dust and the metallic scent of machinery from both the airfield and the advancing enemy. It was a sensory overload: radar pings, engine vibrations, incoming radio chatter, but she remained a model of calm. Years of training, countless hours in simulators and real combat scenarios had honed her reflexes, instincts, and focus. Nothing could break that concentration now. Below, Marines watched in awe as their lone protector prepared for battle. Whispers spread across the ranks. She's going up. She's really going up. Some couldn't help but pray. Others clutched their rifles tighter, and a few simply stared, frozen by the audacity of the act. In that moment, morale shifted subtly. Despair gave way to hope. They were not defenseless. They had a shield above them, a force willing to engage 50 times the enemy's numbers alone. As the Apache soared higher, the pilot initiated weapons targeting systems. Sensors locked onto enemy armored vehicles and infantry formations. Every pixel, every blip on the radar represented a potential threat. She made mental notes of high-priority targets and strike sequences. The first salvo had to be decisive, hitting the enemy where it would cause maximum disruption. She visualized the explosions, the chaos it would create, and the critical seconds it would buy the Marines on the ground. She adjusted altitude and speed, weaving through rising thermal currents, dust clouds, and gusts of wind. The helicopter responded perfectly to her touch, every control input precise. She was not just flying. She was orchestrating a battle, a symphony of motion, destruction, and life-saving intervention. Above all, she remained aware of the fragility of the mission. Her armor could only withstand so much. Her weapons could only destroy so much. Yet within those limits lay the power to turn the tide. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the Apache moved into position. She could see the enemy more clearly, now the armored vehicles rolling forward, machine guns mounted and ready, infantry spreading like a wave across the desert sand. Anti-aircraft fire positions became more visible, the glint of metal betraying their locations. Every second brought them closer. Every footfall of engines echoed like the drumbeat of impending destruction. She tapped the communications panel and spoke briefly with the command post, engaging at discretion. All systems ready. Stand by for strike. Static crackled in reply, the words nearly lost in interference. Understood. Good luck. There was no other way. Luck would not save the Marines. Only precision, skill, and unwavering courage would. Hovering over the desert, she took one last deep breath. The horizon stretched endlessly, enemy forces closing in, and below her, 300 lives waited. The Apache's rotors sliced through the air like blades, engines roaring with latent fury. And then, without hesitation, she tilted the aircraft forward, eyes fixed on the advancing enemy, heart pounding with purpose. The first strike of the battle was about to commence. The calm of the airport had ended. The storm was imminent, and she was about to lead it. Against orders, alone, and outnumbered 50-1, the lone Apache pilot prepared to descend into the chaos, determined to save every Marine she could. The desert trembled beneath the approaching storm of enemy forces. Dust clouds rose like smoke signals over the horizon as armored vehicles rolled in synchronized formations, while infantry squads fanned out across the open terrain. From above, the lone Apache pilot hovered, scanning every movement through her targeting systems. 50-1. The odds were terrifying, yet in her cockpit there was no fear, only precision, calculation, and purpose. She knew the lives of 300 Marines below depended entirely on her first strike. There was no room for hesitation. She adjusted the throttle, tilting the Apache to gain an optimal angle. The enemy's armored vehicles glinted under the rising sun, their cannons and turrets ready to unleash devastation. Infantry formations moved like shadows, disciplined, efficient, deadly. She marked her first high-priority target, a cluster of command vehicles near the front of the column. Disabling the leadership units would disrupt enemy coordination, giving the Marines below precious seconds to regroup and fortify. Her fingers danced over the controls, confirming targeting coordinates for rockets and Hellfire missiles. Each blip on the radar represented imminent danger, each strike a chance to save lives. The Apache responded to her every command with fluid precision, the hum of rotors blending with the tension in her veins. She knew that the first salvo would define the battle. Success could turn the tide. Failure would be catastrophic. Below, Marines glanced upward as the Apache hovered above the battlefield. Some whispered prayers. Others clutched their weapons tighter, watching as their lone protector prepared to strike. The desert stillness had dissolved into tension, the quiet before a storm that would shake the earth. Every heartbeat stretched, every second felt elongated as they waited for salvation to descend from the sky. The first missiles fired in rapid succession, streaking across the desert with deadly accuracy. The impact was immediate. Explosions tore through the enemy command vehicles, sending flames and twisted metal skyward. The ground shook, and dust billowed in massive clouds, momentarily obscuring the advancing forces. Infantry scattered, thrown into chaos by the sudden destruction, while armored vehicles faltered, their formation broken. The Marines below cheered, their morale surging. For the first time, hope flickered in the shadow of overwhelming odds. The pilot's first strike had achieved more than destruction. It had disrupted the enemy's rhythm, creating confusion and fear among the approaching forces. She did not allow herself a moment to celebrate. The battle had only begun, and 50 times the enemy still loomed across the desert. Anti-aircraft fire erupted in retaliation. Tracers streaked toward the Apache, cutting through the morning sky with lethal precision. The pilot twisted, banked, and climbed, evading the deadly projectiles with fluid grace. Each maneuver required split-second timing. A single mistake could pierce her armor or cripple the aircraft. She remained calm, her training and instinct merging into a seamless rhythm. Every evasive move was deliberate, each adjustment calculated to maximize safety while maintaining offensive capability. She targeted the next cluster of enemy vehicles, heavily armored transports, and artillery units. Rockets launched from the Apache streaked toward their targets, followed by precision rounds from the 30mm cannon. Explosions rocked the desert, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the air. Enemy formations reeled under the barrage. The sheer ferocity of the assault created chaos on the ground, forcing the attackers to pause, regroup, and reassess. From below, Marines began to move more confidently. Machine gun teams opened fire on disoriented infantry, taking advantage of the confusion. Leaders shouted orders, directing squads to cover vulnerable flanks and protect critical positions. The enemy's advance, once methodical and terrifying, had slowed. The tide of battle was beginning to shift, all thanks to the pilot above. She had become more than a weapon. She was a force multiplier, a beacon of hope amid overwhelming darkness. But the enemy was relentless. Tanks began to reposition, attempting to flank the Apache, while anti-aircraft teams recalibrated their aim. The pilot adjusted, rising slightly to avoid a deadly volley of fire. Her sensors picked up heat signatures from hidden artillery positions, which she marked for the next strike. Every second was a calculated risk, every maneuver a dance with death. She knew the importance of momentum hesitation could allow the enemy to regroup and push the Marines back into certain doom. She unleashed a new wave of missiles, targeting artillery clusters and heavy armor. Explosions erupted, sending shards of metal and clouds of smoke into the sky. Infantry units scattered, some thrown off balance by the concussive blasts. The sound of destruction echoed across the desert, reverberating in the minds of those watching below. The Apache hovered above it all, a solitary figure orchestrating chaos with unmatched precision. Marines on the ground began to coordinate more effectively. They moved with renewed confidence, covering open stretches and fortifying positions. Some called out enemy movements spotted through the dust, relaying information to each other and to the pilot above. Every action below was synchronized with the strikes above, creating a deadly synergy that had not existed minutes before. The balance of power was shifting, slowly but unmistakably. The pilot remained vigilant. She scanned the horizon, tracking residual enemy forces and identifying the most immediate threats. Her next targets were anti-aircraft positions, attempting to track her movement. She deployed missiles with meticulous timing, ensuring destruction without endangering friendly forces. The explosions lit the desert, sending plumes of smoke and debris skyward, while enemy soldiers scrambled for cover. Her precision was surgical, each strike a testament to her skill and training. The first shock of combat had achieved its purpose. The enemy, once confident and methodical, now hesitated. Confusion spread among their ranks, slowing their advance and disrupting coordination. From the ground, Marines witnessed the transformation, despair turning to cautious hope, fear giving way to determination. The presence of a single skilled pilot above them had changed everything. Yet the battle was far from over. The enemy's morale would not break easily. They began to regroup, adjusting formations, repositioning artillery, and coordinating counterattacks. Anti-aircraft fire intensified, and enemy armor moved strategically to protect vulnerable units. Every action required the pilot to maintain split-second focus, balancing offensive strikes with evasive maneuvers. Her heart raced, but her mind remained calm, a machine of precision and resolve. As she prepared for the next strike, the pilot glanced briefly toward the airfield below. Marines moved with renewed purpose, covering each other and reinforcing defensive positions. Their reliance on her was clear, but she understood the weight of responsibility she bore. Every decision she made, every trajectory calculated, could mean life or death. She tightened her grip on the controls, focused entirely on the task at hand. The first strike had shocked the enemy. The second would aim to shatter them completely. Rockets launched in rapid succession. Cannon rounds tore through armored vehicles, and artillery positions erupted in flames. The battlefield became a chaotic landscape of smoke, fire, and destruction. Infantry scattered in disarray, tanks faltered, and command units were reduced to rubble. The desert trembled under the force of the Apache's assault. Below, Marines felt a surge of relief and determination. They began to push back, coordinating fire with the destruction above. The enemy, once confident in overwhelming numbers, now faced resistance amplified by the precision and skill of a single pilot. Hope had taken root in the chaos, and with it, a renewed fighting spirit. The Apache hovered above, a solitary avenger, orchestrating destruction and salvation simultaneously. The first strike had done more than damage the enemy. It had changed the psychological landscape of the battlefield. Terror, chaos, and confusion rippled through the advancing forces, while below, the Marines gained confidence, emboldened by the pilot's unmatched courage and skill. Every explosion, every evasive maneuver, every calculated strike reinforced a single truth. Against impossible odds, one determined individual could turn the tide of battle. The desert was alive with destruction, but the pilot remained calm, focused, and relentless. The first strike had been a shock. The next moves would cement her legend. The roar of engines and the thunder of artillery echoed across the desert like a storm breaking upon an open plain. The first strike had sent waves of chaos through the enemy ranks, but retaliation came swiftly. Anti-aircraft fire erupted, streaking through the morning sky in deadly lines of tracer fire. Mortar shells exploded in the sand below, sending up geysers of dirt and smoke. The Apache pilot felt the aircraft shudder under the impact of near misses, her visor reflecting flashes of fire and smoke. She was no longer observing the battlefield, she was in it, entwined in a lethal dance with death itself. Every instinct she had honed over years of training screamed for precision. She twisted, banked, and spiraled through the sky with fluid grace, evading incoming fire by mere feet. Each evasive maneuver was a delicate calculation. The desert floor seemed to rise and fall with every movement of the rotors, a canvas for the deadly choreography unfolding above the Marines' defensive perimeter. Her eyes darted between sensors, radar, and visual cues, predicting the trajectory of every missile, shell, and projectile aimed at her. One miscalculation would mean obliteration. One moment's hesitation could spell disaster for the lives below. She leveled the Apache briefly to unleash a counterstrike. Rockets streaked toward anti-aircraft positions, detonating in synchronized explosions that illuminated the battlefield with smoke and fire. Enemy infantry scattered, artillery units faltered, and armored vehicles staggered under the precise onslaught. The pilot's focus was absolute, each movement a combination of skill, instinct, and unwavering courage. She was not merely flying a machine. She had become a weapon, a guardian angel guiding destruction with meticulous precision. Below, the Marines watched in awe and disbelief. Their lone protector above was performing maneuvers that seemed impossible, evading death in plain sight while raining destruction on the enemy. Soldiers ducked behind sandbags and reinforced positions as artillery shells exploded around them. Yet each explosion above bolstered their hope. The impossible odds, the 50-to-1 ratio, suddenly felt more like a challenge than a death sentence. This single pilot was rewriting the rules of survival, turning despair into determination. The enemy had learned quickly. They adjusted formations, repositioned anti-aircraft guns, and coordinated counterattacks. Tracer fire and missiles converged on the Apache from multiple directions. It was a deadly trap, designed to overwhelm even the most skilled pilot. Yet she weaved through it all with uncanny precision, using terrain, thermal currents, and split-second timing to her advantage. Every maneuver was deliberate, a calculated gamble where the stakes were measured in lives. She banked sharply to avoid a volley of missiles, targeting the north perimeter, her rotors slicing through the air as she climbed to gain altitude. From this higher vantage, she could identify vulnerable enemy positions, mark them for destruction, and maintain situational awareness of the entire battlefield. Her targeting systems locked onto a battery of anti-aircraft guns, which had been threatening both her and the Marines below. With a series of precise commands, rockets launched in rapid succession, obliterating the threat and sending debris and fire spiraling into the desert. The pilot's actions were not just offensive, they were defensive strategies for the Marines on the ground. Every enemy unit she eliminated was a second bought for soldiers who were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing imminent annihilation. Machine gun teams and rifle squads took advantage of the chaos, firing on exposed enemy infantry and holding critical positions that would have otherwise been overrun. Coordination between air and ground was instinctive, a silent language of survival that spoke louder than words. Despite the intensity, the pilot maintained an uncanny calm. Sweat dripped under her helmet, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins, but her focus never wavered. Every second counted. Each evasive maneuver had to be precise, each strike perfectly timed. Her training had prepared her for combat, but this was beyond any simulation. She was outnumbered 50-1, yet she was turning the tide of the battlefield with skill, bravery, and sheer determination. The enemy adapted, attempting to flank the Apache with armored vehicles, while infantry units advanced under the cover of smoke and debris. The pilot anticipated their movements, predicting every vector, and plotting a series of maneuvers to counter their attacks. She rolled the helicopter sharply, twisting and banking in patterns that seemed impossible to the untrained eye. Missiles streaked toward armored units, detonations rocked the desert, and artillery positions crumbled under precise targeting. Chaos reigned below, but it was chaos she controlled, orchestrated with meticulous strategy. Each maneuver required split-second calculation. The pilot adjusted altitude to avoid a surface-to-air missile, then dived toward a vulnerable armored vehicle cluster, releasing rockets with lethal precision. Explosions erupted, sending sand and smoke skyward in plumes that momentarily obscured enemy vision. Infantry units scattered in disarray, their advance slowed by the relentless assault from above. The battle was a deadly dance, but the Apache led it flawlessly, turning the desert into a theater of calculated destruction. On the ground, Marines gained renewed confidence. The psychological impact of witnessing their lone protector dominate the battlefield was profound. Hesitation gave way to determination. Fear transformed into focused action. Rifle squads moved to cover exposed flanks. Machine gun teams fired with lethal precision, and officers coordinated movements with the knowledge that the sky above had their back. The pilot was not just a weapon, she was a morale multiplier, a force that made the impossible seem achievable. The enemy, however, was far from defeated. They regrouped, repositioning artillery and armored units, attempting to create overlapping fields of fire to pin the Apache. She responded with relentless precision, scanning the battlefield for threats while maintaining evasive maneuvers. Every second required perfect coordination of mind and machine. The Apache became an extension of her body, responding to her instincts, guided by skill and unwavering determination. She adjusted position, exploiting terrain to shield herself from concentrated fire, then launched a coordinated strike against an enemy artillery battery threatening the Marines' perimeter. Rockets struck simultaneously, detonating in a series of massive explosions that sent vehicles flipping and debris scattering. Infantry units broke formation, scrambling to regain control, while armored vehicles faltered under the unexpected assault. The battlefield, once dominated by overwhelming enemy forces, had shifted in favor of the defenders, thanks to the skill and bravery of a single pilot. The pilot's hands moved with practiced precision, eyes scanning multiple screens and the horizon simultaneously. She communicated with the Marines on the ground, marking targets and identifying enemy movements. Left flank, 30 meters from your position. Enemy infantry moving in. Hold fire until impact. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and focused, a lifeline for soldiers overwhelmed by numbers and fear. Coordination between air and ground created a lethal synergy, amplifying the Marines' effectiveness against the overwhelming odds. Hours of relentless maneuvering tested her endurance. Fuel levels dropped, ammunition dwindled, and the desert heat pressed against the cockpit, but she refused to relent. Every enemy vehicle destroyed, every anti-aircraft gun eliminated, was a step closer to victory. The Apache became more than a machine. It was a shield, a weapon, and a symbol of defiance against impossible odds. The battlefield below reflected the effectiveness of her maneuvers. Enemy formations were disrupted, artillery positions destroyed, and morale shattered. Marines pressed forward with renewed determination, coordinated with the strikes above, and slowly began to push the enemy back. The impossible odds, the 50-1 force, were beginning to feel surmountable, and hope had taken root amid chaos and destruction. The pilot took a brief moment to scan the horizon. Dust clouds from explosions hung in the air, shimmering in the morning sun. The roar of engines, the crackle of gunfire, and the explosions created a symphony of war, but she remained a calm conductor, orchestrating precision strikes and evasive maneuvers with unmatched skill. Each decision, each movement, was a lifeline for the Marines below. Even as the enemy adapted and attempted new strategies, the Apache responded flawlessly. Anti-aircraft fire continued, but evasive maneuvers and strategic strikes neutralized the threat. Armored vehicles moved to flank, but rockets and cannon fire decimated their advance. Infantry units attempted to regroup, but the chaos sown by the pilot above ensured they remained disoriented and vulnerable. She was more than a soldier. She was a force of nature, bending the battlefield to her will. By mid-morning, the desert battlefield had transformed. What had been an advancing wave of overwhelming enemy forces had become a chaotic, disorganized retreat. Marines on the ground moved with confidence, covering each other and reinforcing defensive positions. The Apache hovered above, relentless, precise, and unyielding. The pilot had turned the tide, proving that skill, courage, and determination could overcome even the most impossible odds. The desert battlefield had become a maelstrom of fire, smoke, and chaos. Explosions punctuated the rhythmic thunder of armored vehicles, while infantry units scrambled to gain cover among the dunes and scattered debris. Dust and sand swirled violently around the advancing enemy, partially obscuring their movements, but amplifying the danger to the Marines below. For a moment, it seemed as if the overwhelming numbers of the enemy would engulf the defenders. But from above, the Apache hovered a vigilant guardian, a single lifeline capable of turning the tide. The pilot's hands moved with precision, guiding the helicopter like an extension of her own body. Every flick of the wrist, every adjustment of the throttle, was a calculated action designed to save lives. She identified a squad pinned down near the north perimeter, trapped under a hail of enemy fire. Machine guns, rifles, and RPGs converged on their position, and they had no cover. The radio crackled. "We're taking heavy fire. Request immediate air support." She locked her targeting sensors on the nearest enemy positions and assessed the optimal sequence for engagement. Rockets arched across the desert sky, detonating among the enemy ranks and scattering infantry into disarray. The explosion sent a plume of sand and smoke into the air, providing just enough cover for the trapped Marines to reposition behind a low ridge. The pilot adjusted the Apache, readying a second wave of strikes for the armored vehicles attempting to flank them. Below, the Marines moved with newfound courage. The presence of the Apache transformed fear into action. Soldiers coordinated fire with the air assault, taking advantage of the confusion she created among enemy ranks. The previously overwhelming numbers of the attackers were now chaotic, their formations disrupted by precision strikes from above. Every soldier felt the invisible hand of protection hovering overhead, guiding them, covering their vulnerabilities, and granting them a chance at survival. The enemy, however, was not defeated. They adapted quickly, attempting to coordinate counterattacks while using terrain to conceal anti-aircraft positions. Tracer fire lit the sky as missiles streaked toward the Apache. She twisted, banked, and climbed with perfect timing, narrowly evading each volley. Each maneuver required split-second calculation, and every evasive action left her exposed for just enough time to be deadly if misjudged. She felt the pulse of the battlefield, predicting enemy movements and striking where it mattered most. The Marines continued their advance, moving strategically to cover vulnerable positions. A forward squad had reached a partially destroyed hangar, using it as a temporary stronghold. The pilot identified the enemy units closing in from the east and adjusted her flight path to intercept. Rockets struck armored vehicles, sending them careening into the sand. Infantry units broke formation, running for cover, while machine gun nests were neutralized with precise cannon fire. The desert became a chaotic tableau of destruction, controlled with meticulous precision from above. Every moment brought new threats. The pilot spotted an enemy sniper team attempting to target a group of Marines crossing an exposed stretch. She adjusted the Apache's angle, hovering at just the right altitude, and fired a controlled volley of missiles and rounds. Explosions sent sand and debris flying, eliminating the threat and creating a clear path for the Marines below. Soldiers cheered, their morale bolstered by the pilot's unwavering presence. They moved as if guided by her hands, a coordinated force empowered by the deadly precision above. Amid the chaos, she received urgent reports from the Marines over the radio. "We've got wounded. Need immediate extraction support." Her eyes scanned the battlefield, identifying a safe corridor for medevac. Enemy fire raged around them, but the path she carved through destruction offered a slim chance for survival. She guided the soldiers toward the temporary cover she created, marking enemy positions for destruction as they moved. Rockets and cannon fire erupted, each strike deliberate, clearing obstacles and suppressing threats. The first wounded Marines were dragged to safety, their gasps and cries punctuating the roar of battle. The pilot hovered overhead, ensuring the enemy could not advance on their position. Even as she continued to engage armored vehicles and anti-aircraft positions, she maintained situational awareness of the vulnerable soldiers below. Each second counted. Every miscalculation could result in casualties. The desert was a deadly chessboard, and she was orchestrating every move with unparalleled skill. Meanwhile, enemy commanders attempted to regroup. They realized that the morale and strategy of their assault had been shattered by the lone Apache. Anti-aircraft teams were repositioned, armored vehicles shifted to create protective barriers, and infantry units tried to coordinate flanking maneuvers. But the pilot anticipated every move. She deployed rockets to disable the armored shields, used cannon fire to disrupt infantry coordination, and adjusted altitude to stay out of reach of newly positioned anti-aircraft weapons. Each action was both defensive and offensive, protecting the Marines while dismantling the enemy's strategy. The Marines below felt the shift in momentum. What had once seemed like an unstoppable wave of destruction was now a series of disorganized, isolated attacks. Officers directed squads to exploit the confusion, reinforcing key positions and covering exposed flanks. Communication became a lifeline. Soldiers called out enemy movements, marking targets for the Apache above. It was a symbiotic relationship, a deadly coordination of ground and air forces. The pilot became the unseen hand guiding survival, every strike a lifeline extended to the men she had vowed to protect. The enemy, desperate and disoriented, attempted a concentrated attack on the west perimeter. Tanks advanced while infantry tried to encircle the Marines' positions. She adjusted her trajectory, hovering just above a ridge to gain optimal sight lines. Rockets and cannon fire obliterated the advancing vehicles, while precision targeting disrupted infantry squads attempting to close the perimeter. Marines on the ground moved with confidence, engaging the enemy, now emboldened by the strategic advantage her presence provided. Amid the chaos, a group of wounded soldiers was still trapped near a ruined supply depot. Enemy fire had pinned them down, and their situation seemed dire. The pilot focused all sensors on their location, identifying multiple enemy threats surrounding the area. She executed a complex series of maneuvers, weaving through missile fire and anti-aircraft positions. Rockets tore through enemy fortifications, clearing a path for the trapped soldiers. Guided by her radio instructions, they moved to safer ground, each step shielded by the precise destruction raining from above. Hours of relentless action began to take their toll. Exhaustion clawed at her body, fuel levels dropped, and ammunition dwindled. Yet, every time the enemy attempted to reorganize, she was ready. Each wave of attack was met with precision strikes, evasive maneuvers, and protective guidance for the Marines below. The psychological impact was immense. Soldiers, who had once feared annihilation, now fought with renewed vigor, their belief in survival reinforced by the relentless presence of their guardian above. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the battlefield had transformed. Enemy formations were fragmented and disoriented. Armored vehicles were destroyed or immobilized, anti-aircraft positions eliminated, and infantry units scattered. The Marines had established temporary strongholds and were pushing back strategically, taking advantage of every opportunity created by the Apache. The pilot had done more than destroy the enemy. She had saved lives, restored morale, and shifted the course of the battle. Every explosion, every evasive maneuver, every precision strike reinforced the singular truth: one individual, with skill, courage, and determination, could change the outcome of what seemed an impossible fight. The desert trembled with the remnants of conflict, smoke and fire rising from shattered vehicles and disrupted formations. Yet amid the chaos, the Marines survived. They regrouped, fortified, and pressed forward, guided by the relentless presence above. The pilot's focus never wavered. She scanned for residual threats, monitored her fuel, and coordinated with ground forces to ensure continued safety for the Marines. Even as the enemy attempted to regroup, she maintained the offensive, ensuring that no opportunity for retaliation remained. Her efforts were a lifeline, every strike a calculated measure of salvation. By late afternoon, the enemy had been effectively neutralized in critical areas around the airfield. The Marines were safe, at least temporarily, and the first real victory in the battle had been secured. Exhausted, but undeterred, the pilot hovered, monitoring the battlefield for lingering threats. Her mission had been a success, not just in destruction, but in preservation. She had saved hundreds of lives and ensured that the Marines could hold their ground. The desert stretched endlessly around them, scarred by the battle, but alive with the hope she had brought. Below, the Marines looked up at the Apache with gratitude, awe, and renewed determination. She had become more than a pilot. She was their shield, their weapon, and their savior. Against impossible odds, she had turned the tide, proving that courage, skill, and unwavering resolve could defy even the most overwhelming threats. The desert sun had climbed to its zenith, scorching the barren landscape and casting long, wavering heat waves across the tarmac and dunes. The battle had raged for hours, relentless and unforgiving. The enemy's forces, initially a towering wave of 50 to 1, were now fragmented and disorganized, retreating under the precision and might of a single Apache and the determination of the Marines below. Yet victory was far from guaranteed. Exhaustion gnawed at the pilot, her muscles taut with tension, her mind running on a razor's edge. Every second was a balancing act between survival and continued engagement. She adjusted the throttle to hover over a ridge, scanning the desert for any sign of regrouping enemy units. Smoke rose in thick plumes from destroyed armored vehicles, mingling with the swirling dust to create a surreal haze that obscured the battlefield. From this vantage, she could see the chaos she had wrought. The enemy scattered, their formations shattered, yet pockets of resistance remained, desperate to reclaim ground. Her hands moved almost automatically over the controls, launching rockets, firing the 30mm cannon, and guiding her path through a complex maze of threats. Below, the Marines were battered but alive. They had pushed back the enemy's advance and held critical positions, all while under the protective canopy of the Apache above. Officers shouted commands, rallying squads, coordinating defensive fire, and tending to the wounded. Their morale, once frayed under the overwhelming numbers, had been reignited by the relentless air assault. Soldiers who had moments ago feared annihilation now moved with renewed confidence, their belief in survival strengthened by the pilot's unwavering presence. The enemy, sensing the futility of frontal attacks, shifted tactics. Armored vehicles attempted to flank from the south, while infantry units sought cover among dunes and ruined structures to stage counterattacks. Anti-aircraft teams repositioned strategically, hoping to trap the Apache in a deadly crossfire. Tracer fire streaked toward the helicopter, cutting through the morning haze, while mortar shells exploded nearby, sending geysers of sand into the air. The pilot's heart raced, but her mind remained a machine of focus. Every maneuver was calculated, every strike deliberate. She twisted and banked the Apache to evade incoming fire, predicting the trajectory of missiles and artillery shells. Rockets were launched at anti-aircraft positions, exploding with deadly precision, while cannon fire tore through advancing infantry and armored vehicles. Each action was both defensive and offensive, protecting the Marines below while dismantling enemy strategies. Her endurance was tested, but she knew that even a brief lapse could undo hours of progress. The pilot's body screamed in protest, muscles burning, fatigue threatening to compromise her reactions. Sweat poured beneath her helmet, yet her eyes never wavered from the battlefield. The desert air, thick with smoke and heat, pressed against her like an invisible weight. But she pressed on, knowing the lives of hundreds of Marines depended on her. Exhaustion could not be entertained. Only focus and precision mattered. From the ground, the Marines fought with renewed vigor. Rifle squads fired on disoriented infantry. Machine gun teams suppressed advancing units, and officers coordinated maneuvers to reinforce exposed positions. Every movement was amplified by the air support above. The Apache's presence transformed the psychological landscape of the battlefield. Fear and despair gave way to confidence and determination. Soldiers who had moments ago been pinned down now advanced strategically, covering each other, pushing the enemy back. The enemy's counterattacks grew desperate. Tanks advanced under cover of smoke, attempting to overwhelm isolated squads. Infantry units attempted to flank from multiple directions, while anti-aircraft teams recalibrated to target the Apache. The pilot anticipated each move. She adjusted altitude, veered sharply to avoid incoming fire, and released a series of rockets at the advancing vehicles. Explosions erupted, sending sand and debris high into the air, scattering infantry and halting the armored advance. Each strike was a calculated risk, executed with deadly precision. Hours into the engagement, the battlefield had become a fragmented landscape of destruction. Destroyed vehicles, crumpled artillery, and scattered infantry littered the desert, punctuated by rising plumes of smoke. Yet amidst the chaos, life endured. Marines moved strategically, tending to wounded comrades, securing key positions, and maintaining defensive lines. The pilot remained relentless, orchestrating precision strikes to suppress remaining threats and shield the soldiers below. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Every muscle ached, her arms burned from gripping the controls, and her mind teetered on the edge of fatigue. Yet she refused to relent. The lives of 300 Marines depended on her continued vigilance. Her body screamed for rest, her senses strained to their limits, but her determination burned brighter than any physical limitation. She was a human weapon of precision and resolve, undeterred by the overwhelming odds or the brutal environment. As the afternoon wore on, the enemy's forces began to fracture completely. Tanks were destroyed or immobilized, infantry units scattered, and artillery positions neutralized. Anti-aircraft teams were systematically eliminated. Their capacity to threaten the Apache diminished. The pilot strikes had not only disrupted enemy formations, but shattered morale. What had begun as an overwhelming assault had become a desperate, chaotic retreat, each action guided and amplified by her presence. The Marines, recognizing the turning tide, pressed forward with tactical precision. Rifle squads advanced to reclaim lost ground. Machine gun teams suppressed isolated enemy units, and officers coordinated movements to secure the perimeter. The psychological impact of witnessing the Apache's relentless assault was profound. Soldiers moved with renewed confidence, inspired by the pilot's courage and skill. Fear had been replaced by determination, and despair transformed into hope. The pilot's efforts were not merely offensive. They were protective, tactical, and life-saving. She identified wounded Marines stranded near a destroyed supply depot and created a safe corridor for their extraction. Rockets and cannon fire tore through enemy positions, clearing the path while artillery units were neutralized. Soldiers moved cautiously but confidently, guided by her precise instructions over the radio. Each life saved was a testament to her relentless commitment and extraordinary skill. Despite hours of continuous engagement, the Apache remained operational, a testament to both the pilot's mastery and the machine's resilience. She coordinated strikes, guided ground forces, and evaded incoming fire with near superhuman precision. Every moment was a delicate balance between aggression and protection, offense and survival. The desert, once dominated by the enemy's overwhelming numbers, had been transformed into a battlefield where courage, skill, and determination dictated the outcome. By late afternoon, the enemy had been decisively defeated. Remaining units were disorganized, fleeing, or neutralized. Armored vehicles lay in twisted wreckage, artillery positions smoldered, and infantry units were either retreating or captured. The Marines had survived, largely due to the pilot's unwavering presence and precision strikes. Exhaustion, smoke, and dust hung heavy in the air, but victory had been achieved. The pilot hovered above the battlefield, scanning for any lingering threats. She had expended nearly all ammunition and fuel, her body aching with fatigue, yet her focus remained absolute. The desert below was littered with the remnants of destruction, but the Marines were alive, their morale and cohesion restored. She had turned the tide, saving hundreds from near-certain annihilation. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the pilot allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. Sweat streaked her face, muscles screamed in protest, and her mind felt the weight of relentless engagement. Yet there was satisfaction, tempered by humility. She had saved lives, preserved the Marines' fighting capacity, and defied overwhelming odds. Her actions had not only altered the course of the battle, but cemented a legend of courage and skill that would be remembered long after the smoke cleared. The Marines looked up at the Apache with gratitude, awe, and renewed determination. They had faced annihilation and survived, guided and protected by a single pilot whose bravery and skill had made the impossible possible. Against 50-1 odds, she had orchestrated destruction, shielded the vulnerable, and turned chaos into victory. A battlefield, once dominated by overwhelming force, now lay under the control of determination, courage, and extraordinary heroism. The pilot finally touched down on the tarmac, engines winding down, rotors slowing to a halt. The desert seemed almost silent in comparison, the echoes of battle fading into memory. She unstrapped from the cockpit, muscles trembling but spirit unbroken. Around her, Marines cheered, some rushing to offer thanks, others simply standing in awe. She had done more than survive. She had saved lives, ensured victory, and forged a legend of bravery that would resonate for years to come. The desert, once alive with the roar of engines, gunfire, and explosions, now lay quiet, scorched, and scarred. Smoke spiraled lazily from the remnants of destroyed enemy vehicles, mingling with the golden haze of the late afternoon sun. Silence settled over the battlefield, broken only by the distant murmurs of soldiers regrouping and tending to the wounded. The 300 Marines who had faced certain annihilation now moved cautiously but confidently, securing the perimeter and assessing their survival. Their lives, forever changed, owed themselves to one extraordinary individual, an Apache pilot who had defied odds, orders, and danger itself. She stepped from the cockpit, her helmet tucked under one arm, every muscle aching, yet her posture radiating strength and resolve. Her uniform was streaked with dust and soot, and sweat dripped from her brow, evidence of the relentless hours of combat she had endured. Yet beneath the physical exhaustion was a quiet satisfaction, a sense of duty fulfilled. She had faced the impossible and prevailed. The Marines, exhausted but alive, surrounded her, some approaching with tentative steps, others simply standing in awe. "Captain." "Thank you," one officer said, voice shaking with emotion. "We wouldn't have made it without you." Soldiers nodded in agreement, some too overwhelmed to speak, their eyes reflecting the intensity of the battle they had just survived. She offered a modest nod in return, knowing that heroism was not defined by accolades, but by action. Lives had been saved, and the impossible had been made possible. In the command tent, a flurry of activity unfolded. Officers documented the engagement, communicated with higher headquarters, and began the process of debriefing. Reports detailed the extraordinary circumstances. 300 Marines facing a 50-to-1 enemy force, an Apache pilot engaging independently, and a decisive shift in the battle's outcome. The numbers alone were staggering, but they only hinted at the magnitude of her courage, skill, and determination. Every calculation, maneuver, and strike had been executed with precision under extreme pressure. Word of her actions spread quickly. Radios crackled with the details. Officers relayed reports to headquarters, and soldiers recounted the events to anyone who would listen. The legend of the pilot who had saved 300 Marines began to grow almost immediately, her name whispered with reverence in the heat of the aftermath. Yet she remained grounded, refusing to let the stories of heroism distract from the real task, ensuring that every Marine was safe, every wounded soldier attended to, and every enemy threat neutralized. Medics moved quickly across the battlefield, tending to injuries sustained during the engagement. The pilot assisted where she could, directing troops to safe zones and providing situational awareness from her unique perspective. Her presence was more than symbolic. It was practical, guiding recovery efforts and ensuring the continued survival of the force she had fought so fiercely to protect. Soldiers who had witnessed her skill in the air now saw her dedication on the ground, further cementing their respect and admiration. Higher command began to arrive as the immediate threats subsided. Officers and dignitaries approached, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. They had received reports of the unprecedented engagement, and first-hand accounts confirmed the extraordinary heroics. The pilot met each official with calm composure, her demeanor unassuming despite the monumental significance of her actions. She deflected praise, focusing instead on the safety of the Marines and the completion of the mission. Duty had been fulfilled, and recognition, though forthcoming, was secondary. In a quiet moment, she stood overlooking the battlefield, surveying the destruction and the signs of survival. Burned-out vehicles, shattered artillery, and scattered infantry told the story of devastation. Yet the resilience of the Marines below spoke to hope and endurance. The pilot reflected on the hours of combat, the calculated risks, and the split-second decisions that had determined the outcome. Every maneuver, every strike, had been a lifeline for those below. Every second had counted, and every decision had carried weight beyond imagination. News of her actions soon reached broader audiences, both within the military and beyond. Stories circulated in military briefings, in newspapers, and on broadcasts, highlighting the extraordinary courage and skill that had saved 300 lives. Analysts praised the precision of her strikes, the mastery of her evasive maneuvers, and her unwavering commitment to duty. The narrative of a lone pilot against impossible odds captured the imagination and inspired admiration. Yet for her, the real victory was not the recognition. It was the fact that every Marine she had protected was still alive, still fighting, still holding the line. Awards and commendations followed. Medals, honors, and public acknowledgments were bestowed in recognition of extraordinary valor. Commanders recounted her engagement in detail, emphasizing not just the tactical brilliance, but the courage and initiative displayed under impossible circumstances. Colleagues and subordinates alike celebrated her, viewing her as a symbol of hope, skill, and selfless dedication. Yet, despite the accolades, she remained focused on her role as a protector and guardian, humble in the face of extraordinary achievement. The aftermath of the battle extended beyond recognition. The Marines she had saved carried forward her example of courage and perseverance, inspired to meet challenges with resilience and determination. Lessons learned from the engagement were incorporated into training, emphasizing initiative, precision, and coordinated support between air and ground forces. Her actions became a case study, a benchmark for heroism under fire, and a lesson in leadership, courage, and tactical mastery. Months later, the battlefield itself became a symbol of resilience. The scorched desert, once a site of chaos and death, became a reminder of courage against overwhelming odds. Monuments and plaques commemorated the engagement, honoring not only the pilot, but the Marines who had survived and fought with unwavering resolve. Veterans recounted the battle in training, in memoirs, and in conversations with new recruits, emphasizing the critical role of courage, coordination, and determination. In interviews and personal reflections, the pilot spoke modestly of the engagement. She described the battle in terms of duty, strategy, and responsibility rather than heroism. "I did what any pilot would do in that situation," she would say, emphasizing the importance of protecting the Marines and following instinctual training. Yet for those who had witnessed her actions, there was no question. She had transcended the ordinary, embodying valor, skill, and unwavering commitment in a way that would be remembered for generations. Her story became more than a recounting of a battle. It became an enduring example of courage under impossible circumstances. Military academies studied her decisions. Leadership seminars cited her composure under pressure, and the public admired her bravery. She had become a symbol of the extraordinary potential within individuals when faced with insurmountable odds. Every maneuver, every decision, every risk taken in the cockpit had been magnified by consequence, yet she had turned it into salvation. As the sun set over the desert, casting long shadows over the remnants of the battlefield, she stood once more among the Marines she had saved. Their eyes met hers with a mixture of gratitude, awe, and respect. She had faced impossible odds, maneuvered through fire, and saved lives through courage and skill alone. The battlefield was quiet now, yet the legacy of her actions resonated far beyond the desert sands. In time, her name became synonymous with valor and heroism. Stories were told and retold, not for the sake of fame, but to inspire courage, resilience, and dedication. She had saved 300 Marines from certain death, defied overwhelming odds, and demonstrated that one determined individual could make a difference when it mattered most. The legend of the lone Apache pilot who turned the tide of battle lived on, a testament to courage, skill, and the enduring power of human resolve. The desert, once a place of chaos and destruction, now stood as a monument to survival, bravery, and the unwavering determination of a single hero. And as she looked across the sands, watching the Marines regroup and march forward, she knew that her actions had ensured not just survival, but hope that would endure, inspire, and guide those who followed in her footsteps. The story of the pilot's bravery became more than a tale of combat. It became a narrative of human resilience, courage, and the profound impact one individual could have in the face of overwhelming odds. Her actions that day, every maneuver, every strike, every life saved etched a legacy that would resonate through the military and beyond, a timeless reminder of what it means to rise above fear, embrace responsibility, and confront the impossible with unwavering resolve.